These battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak with their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children. What's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I am so thrilled to have with me two fantastic guests, both of them young men who are running for Congress in my former home state of California. I've got Shervin Aaazami and Derek Marshall. How you doing, guys?
Doing well. How about you, Lauren?
I want to let people know that even though I've left California, I'm still supporting all the progressive candidates that are trying to, get elected from there. I've interviewed a bunch of friends already, and Derek Marshall is a personal friend. I should disclose that right up front. We met when he was on the Pat Harris campaign for Senate. Shervin, I met on the telephone. He called me a few months ago when he was dialing for dollars. I don't know how he got my name, but I was very suspicious. But by the end of our hour-long conversation, he impressed me so much, I said, okay, I'm going to donate. So true disclosure, I have donated to both of these guys. I want them to win. Not everybody I interview I've endorsed, but in this case, I have. So before we start talking about your campaigns, I wanted to ask each one of you your reaction to Nina Turner's loss, and what are you taking away from that you will utilize in your own campaign? And let's start with you, Derek.
Nina's loss on Tuesday to me was a little bit of a sucker punch, because I think I'd really sort of set myself up. I was like, oh, it's obvious she's going to win. She's incredibly dynamic. She's just a force of nature. I had the tremendous privilege of sharing the stage with her on the eve of the Nevada caucus, where I got to give the field pitch before the Nevada caucuses. And so I was definitely not, like, obviously did not leave, wake up on Wednesday being like, wow, this is a great thing. That being said, I think that having been an organizer in the movement for as long as I have, I've been around the proverbial block enough to realize that sometimes it takes a couple of tries, and it just takes us continually fighting and marching and fighting and organizing and doing the thing in order for us to secure victories. And, like a lot of times I like to say that the renaissance of the left, or the renaissance of progressives, in many ways, the contemporary form of it happened in 2011 with Occupy Wall Street, where a lot of consciousness was elevated around the 99%. And since then to where we are today, 11 years later, I think that we've made a lot of progress, particularly on the issues. And I think all that being said, there's also a piece of me that kind of suspects that she's going to run again next year, and she'll probably win this time, because I feel like a lot of the forces that were maybe against her this past week are going to be busy focusing on defending blue districts so that we can hold the House in 22. And I think that because it was an off-cycle year, and because she is who she is and this dynamic force of nature, I think it was kind of a semi-easy target. And I think that next year that's not necessarily going to be the case. And I could be wrong, but that's my personal analysis of everything.
And what lessons do you take away for your campaign? I mean, is there anything you're going to do differently now as a result of seeing how her campaign went down?
For sure. I mean, the one thing that I like to say is that our race is a very different race. We've done we've had a lot of conversations, and it seems very likely that I'm probably going to be the candidate, the candidate with the D next to their name. And so what that means is that I can focus on, basically out organizing a seditionist, a freshman Trump-backed Republican. And so I think that like the lesson, as always, from any movement campaign, including Nina's, is that I'm just going to, just underscores the need to organize, and make sure that we have volunteers, make sure that we're registering voters, make sure that we're focusing on our get out the vote efforts. And I think that with that type of energy, I think that we will, lose some races, but we will win. And I really suspect that it will work in our district here.
Okay, and how about you, Shervin? What is your initial reaction to Nina's loss, and what do you take away for your own campaign?
Yeah, it's similar to Derek's comments. It was very sobering. It was very disappointing. Our campaign canvassed and phone banked for her in the days leading up to Election Day. And it was really disappointing to see her loss, because I think many progressives across the country were looking at her race as a bellwether for 2022. But I agree with Derek that in many ways, it's going to be different when Nina hopefully runs again. It took Cori Bush 2 tries to win, and recognizing again that in her district, the establishment machine poured in all of the efforts, pulled out all the stops to make sure that she lost. And she was going up against the chair of the local Democratic Party, who had the entire establishment machine behind her, pouring in those millions of dollars to ensure that a progressive like Nina would not be the champion. And, especially in a district like hers, where I believe Hillary beat Bernie in 2016, and again, Biden beat Bernie in 2020, she had a huge mountain to climb. And she ran an incredible campaign. To use Derek's word, it was very dynamic, very charismatic, very inspiring. I'm talking about all the issues. And I also had the privilege of joining a meeting with her, and I believe it was about 2 weeks before her election day. It was a healthcare emergency town hall that Progressive Democrats of America put together, and we're the only 2 speakers. And hearing her speak, it inspired me and kind of reaffirmed why we're in this race, trying to fight to uplift and empower working people across the entire country. And so I don't think Nina's going away. I am very, very confident she's going to throw her hat in the ring again next year, and I feel a lot more confident she'll be successful. But, I do think, again, she was running in a district that had a strong establishment presence. And it's going to take more of movement building, more organizing, more outreach, more phone banking, door knocking, and all that work to be able to flip those voters. And I'm excited to see what comes next for her.
What called you to run for Congress as opposed to starting with a local, city council or school board or something like that? We always talk about how the Republicans are very smart. They start at the local level. And all the Bernie-crats I know, they all want to run for Congress. So I want to ask you a little bit, just to talk about your backgrounds, why you feel compelled to run, and why specifically you're starting with Congress. And this time, let's start with you, Shervin.
Thank you. It's a great question. As a public health activist and community organizer by training, I've been working in public health my entire life, for many of those years on the programmatic side. But whenever we work with the community to design public health programs, whether it was on health education, whether it was on disease prevention, whether it was on addressing climate change, housing, healthcare, what have you, there are always barriers in the types of programs we can implement. And those barriers were informed by policies designed by politicians that were completely out of touch with what was going on in their communities. And so it was never the community voice guiding and directing and implementing those programs. And so as I started working more in public health policy, I ended up in Washington, D.C., and became legislative director for the only national indigenous healthcare nonprofit fighting to make sure the federal government honors its treaty obligations to tribal nations. And I did that work at the national level on Capitol Hill for several years during the height of the Trump administration, during the height of COVID-19, with Native peoples being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 death rates, hospitalization rates, infection rates. And I'm proud to say that in those 2 to 3 years I was working on Capitol Hill, I got more bills passed than my opponent has in his 24 years as a legislator. And those bills included canceling copays and deductibles for Native American veterans, getting us one step closer to single payer Medicare for all. guaranteeing long-term funding for community health centers and diabetes prevention programs that provide those essential primary and maternal healthcare services within our low-income communities across the country. And we did that work by being able to mobilize our communities across the entire country to hold their elected officials accountable and demand better, demand that they're actually putting in the work to get these structural reforms enacted. And it demonstrates again that what we lack first and foremost is political courage. And we lack political courage because our politicians are bought and sold by the very corporations acting against passage of these bold structural reforms. And these politicians will just sit there and provide lip service and virtue signal to their community members about all the great work they're doing. But then behind the scenes, it's tinkering around the edges. It's more band-aids on bullet wounds while working people suffer. And so recognizing that in my district, and I know we'll talk about more of the politics and our opponents later in this interview, but that was really the impetus for me. Is I've done this work at a national level successfully, gotten billions of dollars in direct funding to tribal governments, the first time in US history that Congress bailed out tribes during a pandemic. And so to me, the calculus was my district, California 30, the West San Fernando Valley, it is a D+18 district, a district that Bernie Sanders won during the presidential primary, yet we've been stuck with the same corporate representation for 24 years. And kind of the final straw for me, as the son of two Iranian asylum seekers who fled religious persecution in Iran during the time of the revolution back in 1979, and to come to a city like Los Angeles, in our district that has thousands of Iranians, in a city like LA that is home to the Iranian diaspora, lovingly referred to as Tehrangelis. Yet my congressman spoke at a rally in 2019 held by the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK. The MEK are an Iranian militant separatist group that were a designated terrorist organization until 2012, that have no support within Iran. And when you speak to my parents, my grandparents, their generation, they remember the bombings and assassinations and forced kidnappings of the MEK during the Iran-Iraq War. And my congressman spoke at their rally in 2019, the only Democrat to speak at that rally, alongside John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and Rudy Giuliani. That's the company that my congressman keeps when it comes to foreign policy.
Let me ask
And
you
to
something.
know, yeah.
Is that because, let me guess, because they're pro-Israel?
So the MEK is a separatist group that only became politically relevant when they started providing very handsome speaking fees on both sides of the aisle. That's how they made themselves politically relevant. They have no support within the nation of Iran. And for someone like Brad to not learn the lessons of US imperialism and US militarism, when my family fled religious persecution only 25 years after our government here in the United States deposed the only democratically elected leader in Iranian history. That demonstrates that again and again, we are not learning from the consequences of our actions. And that speaks to where Brad Sherman's loyalties lie. Someone who was financed overwhelmingly by weapons manufacturers like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman. And he's been occupying our seat in Congress on their behalf during that time and not delivering for working people. And for him to be this hawkish on foreign policy and to have such out of touch militaristic stances when it comes to these issues of foreign policy, that was the final straw for me.
Yeah.
And that's why I threw my hat in this ring.
Let's talk to you, Derek. Tell us why you decided to run and why start with Congress.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the number one reason why I decided to run is that I, frankly felt fed up that very, very popular policies that make sense to the majority of Americans, strong majorities of Americans, that were just, there are people that are not standing up to fight for those policies at the federal level. And the reason why I've decided to sort of run for a federal level position is that there are very specific policies like Medicare for All, like the Green New Deal, that we need to have champions in the House of Representatives to stand up and fight for these specific policies. So I'm a very, policy driven person. And the thing that I find interesting about our race is that when I am on the phone, so we don't take any corporate donations, but when I'm on the phone with establishment donors, right, what I'm finding is that they're also in support of Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. These are not things that, sometimes we on the left will have this propensity to say that there's, that there's a percentage of folks out there that are supporting establishment candidates because they're so ideologically opposed to things like Medicare for all, Green New Deal, tuition-free college education. When what I'm finding and what I've seen over and over and over again over the past, let's say 10, 15 years is that, like, talking about specific, speaking about the donor class of folks is that these policies are also popular with the base, and the base not just being, the Bernie base, but the entire base of the left. And so that was kind of the impetus. My past and my background, I think I've always been sort of, I guess you could say, sort of like have felt a personal responsibility. My dad's side of the family was working class, New Deal Democrats from New England. I was raised in the United Church of Christ. The pastor who baptized me was very good friends with Martin Luther King. They went to and did their master's degree together at Boston University. This was a mentor for me. And I think that from a very young age, from the church, from my parents, from my entire family, and our weekly mutual aid runs into the city where we provided mutual aid, I think I was just injected with, a sense of personal responsibility to my fellow man, not as a savior, but as someone who, this is the right thing to do. And that sort of bled into the very first country that I ever traveled to outside of Canada and the US was to Haiti, where I went down and did some development work as a teenager. I was 15 and went down right around one of the coups, and I was very, very interested in just kind of like learning. And so had an opportunity from an early age to do that. That then sort of a bridge was then built to me doing my degree in international relations, which then brought me to Europe, where I was working and helped to co-found an international research initiative alongside the United Nations. Actually founded the NGO that we were working for and working with was founded by Eleanor Roosevelt in 1947, the World Federation of United Nations Associations. And we built out this organization to be 100 plus researchers in countries from Tanzania to South Korea to the United States. And basically from that space of international political work, and from the experience of then living in social democracies where there was where Medicare was provided and where college was free, I was able to then see my contemporaries who seemingly had a much easier time than my contemporaries in the US from my college days. And to me, it just didn't make any sense. I was like, how is the GDP per capita of the European Union, which has 500 million people, which is only a fraction of the GDP per capita of the United States, but yet how are folks not having to pay for college? How are folks having very reasonable apartment fees? How are folks having healthcare? How are there high-speed trains? How is there a consciousness about the environment? How are there all of these things that are being paid for and seemingly well-run societies, and why can't we have that here? And once I finally, moved back after having been in Europe for a couple of years and came back here and became an organizer, I decided that I was going to dedicate myself to really building the power, helping to engage with folks, and it kind of blended nicely with Bernie and the movement, the candidacies of different movement candidates, in order to kind of be where we're at today, where I feel like finally our movement is matured. At least the modern iteration of our movement has matured, where we can actually fight for these things that make a whole hell of a lot of sense.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about why these European countries have these things and we don't. I'm going to share in the comments a very heavy podcast I'm listening to that I have to chunk out because it's technical. And it's called The Ruins of Neoliberalism with Wendy Brown, who's a political theorist. And it's on how neoliberalism attacks society and democracy, and in doing so laid the foundation for right-wing authoritarianism and nihilism. It's really a fantastic podcast because, I've always understood about the economic aspects of neoliberalism, but I didn't really realize about the social aspects and how it really took people away from caring about the collective, caring about the society, and only caring about their own individual advancement. And now that I'm in North Carolina, which is a Republican state, I'm arguing back and forth on Nextdoor right now about an emergency shelter. The city's trying to use the COVID money to buy a Ramada Inn on 6 acres. And the neighbors, some of them, fortunately, the majority, this is Asheville, it's kind of liberal. The majority of the people are arguing in favor of it, but there's people that are just talking about and these buzzwords are coming out like personal responsibility and why these people can't be accountable for their behavior. And it's just like they don't understand, the forces of society and what should happen to somebody if, they do everything right and they still fall through the cracks. So it's really interesting, to talk about how you guys, well, especially you, Derek, because you're running in a Republican district where that philosophy is a little more predominant, but, how you talk to people about this, how you overcome 40 years of neoliberalism, to talk about how, you would think a lot of these people are religious and we are our brother's keepers and they're charitable and they give through their church and their families, they take care of their families, but they just don't get that government has a role. It's like Reagan and Thatcher were so good in convincing people that government is the problem, not the solution. Before we get onto your issues, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Poverty is a policy choice. In the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, there is no reason beyond institutional racism, corporate greed, and political cowardice that we cannot guarantee housing, healthcare, clean air and water, education, living wages, and union rights for all. And as you were speaking, Lauren, truly for me, the quintessential application of that neoliberal philosophy is around how we address housing and homelessness. And the second you brought it up, it just clicked in my brain because that is the number one issue here in our district in all of Los Angeles. We are ground zero for our housing crisis. We have 5 unhoused neighbors die per day in the city of LA. We have more unhoused folks die of hypothermia in sunny Los Angeles than in San Francisco and New York City combined. And when I speak to so many folks, we have a lot of people who say, we need to see homelessness eradicated. We can eradicate it with the snap of the fingers. We can eradicate homelessness with 10% of the Pentagon budget.
Yeah.
So we choose not to, because to your point, so many of us are convinced that these are government handouts. We don't understand that by ensuring all of our basic needs are met, our economy prospers, our national security prospers, our collective public health prospers. All of us are lifted when all of us have our basic needs met. But with so many community members, not just in our district, but across LA, across the country, people say, yeah, I want to see an end to homelessness so long as my property values aren't impacted. Well, we can't engage in that kind of thinking. That's not the way we solve the problem. All of us have a collective responsibility. And instead, we see city officials and federal officials put more and more money in the hands of corporate landlords and prioritize luxury apartment buildings, luxury condos over affordable housing, because we're trying to cater to the demographic that can afford to pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month just for rent. Well, if you're a nurse, how do you afford that? If you're a grocery worker, how do you afford that? If you're a sanitation worker, how do you afford that? If you're a teacher, how do you afford that? We're not catering to a community that ensures all of our basic needs are met. And we're also failing to reckon with our sordid history of institutional racism and classism, which work hand in glove. The San Fernando Valley is a great example. So much of our community is zoned for single family housing because so much of the San Fernando Valley was created as a suburban, wealthy, white enclave during the time of redlining. And now the repercussions of redlining are seeing communities where you have high property value, which means a lot more money going to education in those communities. And then you have low-income communities without basic services. We have high food security, lower rates of life expectancy, lower educational outcomes, lower wages, and so forth. And so again, it's around raising, as Derek was talking, raising our collective consciousness and talking about the issues as openly and transparently as possible.
Yeah.
And recognizing that we have to invest in these basic needs because all of us prosper when we do.
Well, I guess it's just a matter of whether, how you convince them that that's what we have to do. I mean, I remember arguing in my next door group, which was Sherman Oaks, because I was on the other side of the hill from Sherman Oaks, and that was the Facebook group, the next door that I was in. And I'll never forget when, who's the guy, who's the city councilman? Is it Krikorian? Yeah, so they had to put in emergency shelters, and they were talking about putting one there, and people were saying crazy things like, "Ooh, they're going to come here for the shelters." Like, hello, they're already there. You don't like them defecating on your lawn, so put them
and provide city services, provide basic sanitation. Why do we criminalize poverty? Why do we criminalize homelessness? LA City just passed an ordinance called 4118, making it illegal to sit, sleep, or lay in the vast majority of public spaces in the city. And it further politicizes housing policy by basically making each city council member the czar for their district when it comes to housing, to clear encampments and literally just make sure people don't see homelessness, as opposed to actually solving homelessness by investing in permanent supportive housing.
Right.
And, you brought up shelters. During the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic, one of the first things Biden did, which was a very good thing, was he authorized the Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide local governments 100% federal reimbursement to shelter folks in hotels for the duration of the pandemic. But the city of LA refused to take that money. They refused to take it.
What about Project Room Key? I thought they did house a lot of
Well, they said that they're going to have 15,000 folks, high risk, and put into housing. They have not even come close to reaching that quota. And now Project Room Key is shut down.
Yeah.
Instead, they decided to open up the floodgates for criminalization with this 4118 measure. It's despicable.
Yeah.
As opposed to providing people the basic human rights to survive, we want to criminalize being poor.
Right.
How is that a solution? It isn't.
Let me go to you, Derek. I want to talk about how you talk to people about this, especially in a Republican district where personal responsibility and distrust of government is so strong. I mean, speaking of that next door group, I'll never forget arguing with one woman who said, and what do I tell my children when we have to walk by all these people sleeping on the streets? I said, well, maybe you should tell them that not everyone is as fortunate as we are, dear, and we need to have compassion for these people, as opposed to like thinking, oh, how unsightly, how do I explain this away? I mean, it just was mind-boggling. Anyway, you go, Derek.
In my view, I think that housing is a human right, and I think that we need to come up with a serious public option so that hundreds of thousands of people here in Southern California that are on the wait list right now to get access to affordable housing, that qualify for affordable housing, immediately are sort of granted, are granted those units, including our unhoused populations, who we have up here in the high desert as well. In terms of conversation, I mean, I think that, again, the thing about movement campaigns and the things that we do very well is we go and meet people where they're at. Every single Trump voter who I have managed to kind of bring back onto the progressive Democratic side has been an individual face-to-face conversation, maybe a couple of phone conversations, but mostly it's going to where they're at and just having a conversation, doing a whole heck of a lot of listening, and trying to connect with folks on at the story level. So talking about healthcare, talking about homelessness, talking about issues, bread and butter issues that affect all of us, having those conversations, and then pivoting from there into actual solutions and policy. I said before, the vast majority of Americans, whether they are, on Team Blue or Team Light Bernie Blue or Team Red or Team Trump Red, most folks agree on a lot of the actual policies. So if you can kind of sort of step away from the factions and from what sports team you're on for 10 seconds, and then you start talking about specific issues, and you treat folks with respect, then you're able to win over hearts and minds. And, I have to say, 2 days ago, I was very happy to open my email and to see an op-ed in Fox News from Bernie, who basically was doing exactly that. He was making a case for the 3.5 trillion infrastructure package that he's kind of pulled together.
You mean the reconciliation?
Yes, precisely. And does it have everything in there that I would want to see as a economic populist progressive? No, but I think it's a really great start. And I think what I really appreciated about Bernie in this particular instance was that he was writing an op-ed for Fox News, and was explaining, hey, 2 people in this country own 40% of the wealth. The top 1% owns 92% of the wealth. That is something very, very, very clear to most people that is unfair, and that an economic system that basically holds that up is probably not it. It's not the thing. Again, echoing what Shervin said before, Stephanie Kelton, who's was one of Bernie's top economic advisors, she always says that a budget is a value statement. And I think that what we need to start doing as progressives, as we go out and meet people where they're at, is to start really communicating about the value statement, because it's really easy to overcome the question of, well, how are we going to pay for it? If you start saying, okay, first of all, we all agree that we're the richest country in the history of the world, right? That's not up for debate. That is the fact. Now let's pivot to the next thing. Let's look at the budget and let's talk, do we need, the Joint Strike Fighters? Do we need these missiles? Do we need, all of these different things? And hey, guess what? All of us would have, free at the point of care, healthcare, if we were to cut a couple of line items from the defense budget. And I think that if we start to have conversations like that, then we are going to, then we're going to start to really build the coalition necessary to be able to win these policies. And I think actually we're well on the way to doing exactly that.
Well, you said something earlier about talking to them and listening, and that's what we call deep canvassing. When you go and you just find out what's the most important issue to them and let them talk about it, rather than lead with, I'm Derek Marshall, I'm running as a Democrat, for Congress, and here are my most important issues. That's what I've learned a lot in organizing, about how to get people on your side. And they say something about what their important issue is, and then maybe you share a story that relates to that from your own experience. And I have another story from your district, Shervin, which was, I was part of the Occupy movement, Occupy LA, and they were a lot of foreclosures, as you know, after the financial collapse. And there was a family by the name of Hernandez who were being foreclosed upon, and they refused to leave. And they held their house. It was called Fort Hernandez. They occupied that house for a good solid year, and they used it sort of as a movement house. And I'll never forget talking with Bilal Ali, who was an African-American organizer from South LA. He's now in Oakland. So I said to him naively, well, Bilal, why don't you go door to door and get all these people together and go over to Brad Sherman's office and say, we're not leaving until you do something about this. And his response was, Lauren, they all think it's their fault because that's the culture now. They feel that they did something wrong. They don't understand it was a systemic thing, you know, starting with Clinton, a Democrat who repealed Glass-Steagall, which set all these chain of events into motion, which led to this thing.
Yeah, you know, you bring up Glass-Steagall and the bill, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, that repealed Glass-Steagall and allowed commercial investment banks to consolidate. That was during Brad Sherman's first term, and he voted for it. And Brad Sherman was also one of the people who voted for provisions in Dodd-Frank and other economic stimulus bailouts in the wake of the Great Recession that allowed corporate firms like BlackRock and Blackstone to start buying up these foreclosed homes and apartment complexes at below market value, and then to artificially keep the supply low and increase demand. And now we live in a society where 1 in 5 single family homes are bought out by private equity firms like BlackRock and Blackstone. Over 2/3 of apartment complexes here in Los Angeles are owned by corporate landlords like private equity firms like BlackRock. And at the same time, over 2/3 of Angelenos are renters. And you know, my family was also dealing with foreclosure. They bought their first house in the couple years leading up to the recession. And I was 15 years old, writing letter after letter after letter to Wells Fargo, pleading with the bank to not foreclose my parents' home. And we were very, very lucky, luckier than so many other people. We were able to keep that house, but that was not the story for millions of Americans. The Great Recession was the greatest eliminator of Black wealth in U.S. history. And we have not made the necessary investments in our communities of color, in our local communities to make them whole. And instead, as Derek pointed out, we now live in a society where we have 719 people that entrenched their wealth by 1.6 trillion, while millions of Americans lost their wages, lost their jobs, lost their healthcare, lost their housing. That's the world we live in now, a true corporatocracy, as you were saying, Lauren.
Pension funds are now buying houses.
Yes.
You know why that is? Because the Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates at 0. So you cannot make money in a CD. You cannot make money in a treasury bill. They're looking for opportunities outside of the stock market, which is already very frothy.
If I may make a couple more comments about this, you know, we've really centered our campaign around housing. And we do mutual aid every single Sunday, almost every single Sunday with our community members, providing food, harm reduction services, tents, tarps, a lot of great organizations like the West Valley People's Alliance here in the Valley. They're doing this work, leading these efforts every single day of the week. And what another one of the impetuses for me to jump in this race was that Brad is literally the guy to do something about our housing crisis. Not just because he's a federal rep, but because he sits as a senior member of the Financial Services Committee, which has jurisdiction over housing, and he chairs the Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, over authorizing affordable housing programs, and over our housing finance laws in general. And as soon as he became chair, BlackRock and Blackstone started investing in his re-election campaigns. And we have not seen him champion a single bill to address housing. I've been on countless of his town halls. Not once has he spoken about housing. Not once has he spoken about homelessness. Not once has he spoken about the fact that the median home price here in the Valley is now just under $1 million. How even though we have a $15 minimum wage here in LA, you got to be making over twice that amount to afford fair market rent here in Los Angeles. What are you doing to address these issues?
Yeah.
He isn't. He's absent on them.
Yeah.
And he has been since day one.
Now, I want to talk about housing policy because you have a very long list of things in there, Shervin. But one thing that I didn't see in the whole page was social housing. And social housing, there's actually a bill in California authored by Alex Lee. And you probably know about this, Derek, because you lived in Europe. But in Vienna and Singapore, those are 2 places that come to mind, they have social housing. And it's mixed use, it's affordable. It's not like the projects that, you know, were so poorly designed and planned, they were just failures in our country. But it's a way to house people, but the government is providing it because quite frankly, The idea of incentivizing real estate developers to pay for affordable housing, it's not possible. The cost of building, the cost of land, the cost of union labor, the cost of regulations, you cannot make profits for somebody who's making minimum wage. You can't.
Yeah. So to clarify, I'm a huge proponent of social housing, and that goes back to repealing the Faircloth Amendment, which is an austerity measure that was enacted during the Clinton era to keep public housing stock at 1999 levels. And I'm a huge proponent of not only repealing that, but fully funding as an entitlement public housing, housing voucher programs, Native American housing, Native Hawaiian housing, and so forth, and taking the power out of the hands of corporate developers and putting it back in the hands of municipalities and people to build housing as an inherent human right. Because we see it now too, where even with nonprofit developers, they prioritize vacant lots for development as opposed to flipping modular buildings. Why? Because you make a lot more money building on a vacant lot than you do flipping perhaps an old school, an old abandoned building that's owned by the city. You make a lot more money on the vacant lots. And so changing that dynamic and really building that social housing, it's absolutely integral to my platform and how we actually solve our affordable housing and homelessness crises. So I want to definitely clarify that piece. And in terms of what we're seeing in the infrastructure package, we saw it dwindle from 2.2 trillion down to, I believe the latest number is around 1.5. But the latest I saw, there's very, very little funding for public housing and infrastructure. Instead, the goal was to address that in reconciliation. But what we're seeing now is a faction of, I'm not even going to call them moderates, conservative Democrats that are trying to push the speaker to say, we don't want reconciliation and infrastructure voted on in tandem. We want you to put infrastructure on the floor by itself, get that passed, and they want to withhold their votes on reconciliation. So this is now a very, very critical point where real progressives have to leverage their power and demand that these two get pushed in tandem.
Right.
And again, I want to talk about the fact that, last week, our campaign staged a protest and sleep-in outside of Brad Sherman's district office for his failure to fight for an extension of the eviction moratorium. It is just mind-boggling and asinine that he would not be there to protect 15 million people from losing their homes. And to hide behind the fact that California has an extension in place, even under California's moratorium, thousands of people have been evicted. This is just Brad Sherman's MO, hiding behind other people's work.
Yeah.
But instead of being out there and saying, look, Congress appropriated $50 billion for rental assistance as part of the American Rescue Plan, only about 7% of that money has actually been distributed down to renters and small-time landlords, which is another case for Ilhan Omar's bill to just cancel the rent, cancel the mortgage payments, as opposed to these mean-tested approaches. Let's do it that way. But it's like, look, let's keep people in their homes. We had to push him to just come out and support the eviction moratorium. And the day after we held our sleep-in, he showed up at the Capitol alongside Cori Bush.
Like right now, Pramila Jayapal and the Progressive Caucus have 40 people who are going to do the opposite of what you said. They're not going to vote for the infrastructure bill until they pass the reconciliation bill. And there's a question, Ryan Grimm was talking about it on his show today, if they're going to have enough moderates, Republicans in, Congress who are going to override that and vote for the reconciliation bill. So it's a very exciting time to be, an activist. And what we should be all doing, we should all be in unison and getting the squad and the Progressive Caucus to, stand firm on that, because we do have the leverage now. Now, you haven't spoken in a couple minutes, Derek. So before we get on to healthcare, do you have anything you want to add about housing and homelessness?
I have to wonder, what did Republicans think about government in the 1950s when we built out the interstate highway system, which at that point was a crown jewel in infrastructure projects around the world? What did Republicans think in the 1960s when the government was funding, NASA and going to the moon, which then, basically provided the research and development that then led directly into the creation of the internet? And I think that what we need to do right now, in the moment that we're at right now, is in making government sexy again. I think that government can be very efficient if it is fully funded, right? And if it is robustly and if it's robust and fully funded, then I think that government can do really well. There is nobody that goes to a national park, whether it's the Grand Canyon or Yosemite or Joshua Tree, that goes there and thinks, wow, this is really the infrastructure here and all the visitor center and everything is so crummy, right? Says nobody, right? Because it's fully funded and it's amazing. And I think that what we have to start talking about is that the Republicans and certain members of our own party over the last 40 years have defunded the government to the point where, for sure, it makes sense. It's going to, it's going to seem wonky, and the infrastructure is going to be crumbling because we haven't spent, the money to actually fix the roads and to fully fund the different programs. It's a ploy. It's a straw man. And I think that what we need to do is we need to start calling it out and saying, look, if we fully fund these things, and by the way, we have the money to fully fund these things, but when we fully fund these things, yes, it's going to be great. And I think that, so speaking again and pivoting back to housing, for me, this is something that touches really close to home because, you said Vienna before, right? But you could also say Stockholm. You could also say Copenhagen. You could also say Berlin. You could also say Tokyo. You could also say any of these cities, right, are not cities that immediately come to mind and you think, oh, wow, everything's falling down and projects and this, that, and the next, right? And why is that? Because there's a public option for social housing in all these cities that are fully funded. And I got to say, having personally lived in social housing in Europe, the nicest apartment, well, okay, maybe that's not, the second nicest apartment that I ever lived in was social housing because there isn't the stigma that's there. Everybody has access to that, to the social housing stock because there's a public option for housing. And so the vision that I personally have, that our campaign has, that I think Shervin has, and a lot of people on the left have, is we want to create a public housing stock of really, really awesome government housing that is beautiful, it's wonderful, it's great to live in, it is just as nice as any other luxury housing that you can find in LA or New York. And I think what we need to start doing is we need to start painting this vision of what the country can look like when we fully fund things that we all know that we need. And I think it's, sorry.
No, I was going to say, because you mentioned Berlin, and it put me in mind, I was just looking it up. Berlin may vote on expropriating landlords amid tenant ire. Berlin's local government faces the prospect of being forced to buy out large landlords such as Vonovia SE after activists said they collected enough signatures to get a referendum on the ballot in September. It speaks to a couple of things, not only that they have so much more consciousness about what they should be getting from their government in Europe, but they're so willing to take to the streets about this. I mean, you talked, Shervin, about what you just did in front of Brad Sherman's office, the sleep out. I mean, that's exactly what Cori Bush did, and she got a lot of attention. And I just feel like in this country, with the exception of, the George Floyd protests, you don't see a lot of people coming out for anything. And I was wondering if either of you have thoughts about that, why that is, and, what we should do about it.
I'm happy to jump in first. I would actually say that we're at this precipice where we're seeing so many people across the country actually standing up and being fed up with a system that's failed working people for decades and decades. Just 2 days after we held our sleep in, I joined Sunrise Movement LA and Sunrise LA Youth and another protest outside of Brad Sherman's office demanding that he support a fully funded civilian climate corps to address our climate crisis. And just this week, we saw the incredibly sobering, all the alarm bells ringing report from the IPCC saying that we have a tiny window of time. I mean, climate change is here. Many of its aspects, from droughts to wildfires to rising sea levels, are irrevocable. but we have a window of opportunity to avoid catastrophic climate change and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And we have to act now. Look, I'm a new father. Our kid is just 8 weeks old. All of our scientists are telling us we have to transition to a 100% renewable energy economy by 2030. That's when he's 9 years old. And I'm thinking to myself, what future are we leaving for the next generation and 7 generations after it? And again, we had to station ourselves outside of Brad Sherman's office just to get him to co-sponsor a CCC. He failed to join 84 of his colleagues a couple of weeks prior in a letter to the speaker demanding a bold and fully funded CCC and the reconciliation package.
We sort of started talking about climate, so we can go back to healthcare in a little bit. But Derek, what is your program for the climate crisis?
We are the front lines of global climate change. I mean, Death Valley, which is in our district, recorded the second hottest day ever recorded on Earth just a couple of weeks ago.
Wow, what was it? What was the temperature?
134 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
And we're running low on water. There's extreme weather events that we're experiencing with greater intensity and cadence every single year. And so I would say that we are definitely one of the front lines. And so I think that we need to treat, the climate crisis, the climate emergency as exactly what it is, the greatest threat to our species that we have perhaps ever faced. And I think that in terms of the mobilization to fight the climate emergency, we need to mobilize as if it's the Second World War. That means that it becomes a wartime economy. The enemy is climate change. And I think that we need to really take a look at our budget. And I think that we need to pivot, and we need to basically start to figure out, every single type of project and policy that will, A, transition us off of fossil fuels, and B, will help to, I'm influenced by regenerative agriculture, but that will help to perhaps, that will help to perhaps, heal the planet and some of the devastation that we've created. And so what that means is that, we have this policy right now that's being spoken a lot about, the Green New Deal. And I think that the Green New Deal is definitely the right course of action. I think that the way that we talk about the Green New Deal, particularly with working people or working class folks in the middle classes, is that it is a job creation program. It is nothing short than the biggest, or it has the potential to be the biggest job creation program that we've ever seen in the history of our republic, that will provide thousands, millions of high quality union jobs so that we can transition our economy off of fossil, and so that we can begin to do our part to heal the planet. And I'll stop there. But basically, Green New Deal, I think is it's the way to go. I think that there is a lot of disturbed mineland in our district that could be the host of different wind and solar projects. I think that we also have to be careful and recognize that, just like the internet, I think that power generation absolutely has to be decentralized, which means that we need to have rooftop solar. Yep. We can't just talk about big, massive solar arrays. That isn't how the internet works, right? Yes, you have big server farms, but also, we have individual nodules where you're able to kind of spread information. And I think that just the way that the internet developed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we need to basically use that model, decentralized model, or partly decentralized model, in order to kind of transition.
Well, meanwhile, we have this weekend, I think it was Sunday, when they were talking about the amendments in the Senate to the infrastructure bill. 7 senators voted to ban fracking bans. And you can guess that 2 of them were Bennett and Hickenlooper. We used to call him Governor Frackenlooper. Now we can call him Senator Frackenlooper. But we have a situation, and you talk in your issues page about UBI, Shervin, and $1,000 a month. And I remember talking to Priscilla Grimm from Occupy Wall Street about a year ago, maybe about a year and a half ago. And she said the federal government doesn't realize what it unleashed when it started paying people these $300 unemployment. I don't know if that was a week or a month or whatever it was. It convinced enough people that when they get their basic needs met, they don't have to go out in the middle of a pandemic and do these dangerous jobs and expose themselves. And now we find, I took my son yesterday in North Carolina here to an $18 an hour and above job fair. People are just, there's not enough employees. Nobody wants to work for minimum wage. Here, minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It's amazing. Everybody said, oh, well, these Republican states, we're going to cut off these unemployment benefits so we can get people back to work. Guess what? They are still not coming back to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to see all these corporations like Walmart, like Target and others, primarily Walmart too, and Amazon, who are union busters, who don't pay their employees living wages. Companies like Walmart, that they've encouraged their folks to go on food stamps. These companies are making record profits during the pandemic, grocery companies as well. Yet they were fighting tooth and nail against hazard pay. I mean, all these politicians calling these folks frontline workers, essential workers, you're not paying them when they're putting their bodies and lives on the line to protect us. And so again and again, it's like, look, I thought the hallmark of capitalism was competition. Why aren't corporations competing for better labor with higher wages? Why isn't that the way we're talking about this? Because again and again, that's not the way capitalism works. Capitalism is based on exploiting workers and their labor to maximize profits for their shareholders. And so being able to have those conversations and talk to communities about, look, we have to invest in living wages and we have to provide basic income for our community members as well. Because we should need to de-link labor from being able to survive. Everyone deserves to survive in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. And when we ensure basic income is there, productivity levels go up. Food insecurity goes down. Anxiety and stress levels go down. People are more likely to go out there and be more productive, get better paying work, take care of their families, open up a small business, take more risks in the economy when they have that stability, that financial stability behind them. And that's why I support universal basic income. That's why I support living wages tied to regional cost of living. Because we see that all of the boats go up, as JFK talked about, when all of our basic needs are met.
Yeah, it's like AOC had that great quote, nobody should be too poor to live.
Mm-hmm.
I like FDR's concept of a second Bill of Rights that guarantees, housing, that guarantees healthcare, that guarantees, income. And, when it comes to UBI, stimulus payments, just making sure that everyone in the society has, sort of like a stipend that comes in every month. I'm 100% in favor of that. I think that we are wealthy enough as a society where we can afford it. And not only do I think that, it's the moral thing to do, it's also the intelligent thing to do. Because, sort of playing off of what Shervin just said, if we are basically providing and making sure and guaranteeing that folks have housing, that they have healthcare, that they have education, that there's like enough money a month where they can like go out and they can, go and see a movie or they have, some disposable income. What happens is that folks are able to, anxiety levels come down, mental health issues come down. So the society is a happier, healthier society. And folks can really start to figure out, A, what they're really good at doing or what they like to do, and B, have the education to be able to do it. And it benefits the economy. So it's a question not just about morality, but about what's good for the economy and what's good for our society, right? And the thing that, again, you look at other societies, right? And it's not just Europe. It's Southeast Asia, right? It's Botswana. It is Canada. It's countries in Chile, right? There's countries that have made the value, a analysis in their budgets and have said, okay, we need to do these things right here because we think it's a really smart thing if our people aren't all living in fear of whether or not they're going to be able to put food on the table, whether or not they're going to be able to pay rent, right? So these are value judgments that have been made by different societies. And what has the result been? The result has been that folks are able to figure out like what they're really good at, and innovation starts to skyrocket. And so, I really like the framing of, right now what we have in this country is this insane inefficiency where 1% of the society owns 92% of the wealth. Put differently, we have socialism for the rich, and we have this extractive capitalism for the rest of us that keeps us pressed down. And frankly speaking, like there may be sometimes the illusion of freedom, but we're not free. Not if we're having to worry about whether or not we're going to be able to pay rent, whether we're going to have to, be able to, afford rent or not. That's not freedom. If we're constantly in a state of fear and anxiety, we are not free. And I think that luckily that illusion is starting to crumble.
I know that both of you are activists, but you're also running for office. And there's a difference between the inside game and the outside game and what you have to do once you get elected. People are saying, well, Bernie hasn't even introduced his Medicare for All bill yet, because he knows that his friend, he keeps calling him my friend Joe Biden, and they are actually personal friends. But, he is now in a position that he's never been in. He's always been the outsider. And now he's on the inside. He's chairman of the budget committee. I would venture to say that, Joe Biden listens to him as much as he listens to Joe Manchin. And he's been working really hard for the people to get these things. And for people to say that he's given up on Medicare for all, and then this thing of getting, Medicare eligibility age lowered to 60, getting vision, dental, hearing, and the ability of Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies, these will provide real material relief to people. This is not nothing, just because it's not Medicare for all. So I want to talk to you about, before we talk about your campaign, your sort of practical approach to governing. So you guys have these great platforms. You want to go get elected. Say you get elected and you move into this reality that we're talking about, where you can see these big bills. I mean, these big COVID bills just got passed. A lot of money has gone out. And more money is even going to be going out with the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill. So we're in a position right now where money is being spent like it has never been spent before. And yet the parameters are so small that they can't even get Joe Biden to forgive. Even Elizabeth Warren is saying, forgive $50,000 of student debt. Forget about canceling it all. They can't even get him to forgive $50,000. How do you go in there as a progressive congressman, presumably joining the squad? I think that's a given that both of you would probably consider yourselves part of the squad. How do you go in there and, get things done to get to this vision that you want before climate change kills us all?
In one word, co-governance. Really working with and for the community to design policy, breaking down those barriers towards civic engagement and getting the community involved in how we work with and design and implement and enact policies. And working with the community on that is going to be super, super important because it removes the illusion and the mystery of how our legislative process works. It provides people more buy-in into the process. And it also provides opportunities for legislators to be upfront and honest and transparent about what the barriers are in getting these structural reforms enacted. It's the work that I did when I was an advocate on Capitol Hill. We would work with tribal leaders and say, here are the legislators that are against us. Here are the ones that are for us. Here are the ones we got to convince, and here's how we do it. And mobilizing our communities in districts across the entire country to hold their legislators accountable. Do sit-ins outside their office, write op-eds, write letters to them, get on the phone every single day and hound their district offices to say, I need you to do this. And really make very concrete, specific demands and provide the tools to our community members around how to hold them accountable so that their lip service and virtue signaling isn't able to allow people's eyes to gloss over and say, all right, fine, they're doing enough. Because that's what people like Brad Sherman have done very, very successfully. And we got to break down those barriers. That's part of it. The other part is recognizing that in a Congress of 535 people, we have 6 members of the squad. There are so many members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, including my opponent, Brad Sherman, who joined that caucus and feigned being a progressive to avoid a primary challenger. So we got to actually call a spade and recognize what being a progressive actually means. To your last Congress, we had 118 co-sponsors of Medicare for All, never even got a hearing. We got to actually move that ball forward. While I also agree, we have to find practical and pragmatic ways of doing this, it has to work with deepening the bench and really igniting a movement across the entire country. I was proud to speak at the Medicare for All March here in Los Angeles a few weeks ago. And we talked about this around how budgets reflect priorities. And this pandemic that has cost millions of people their livelihoods, taken over 600,000 American lives. I don't know how many 9/11s that is. That has to be our clarion call for single-payer Medicare for all, for housing as a human right, for living wages, clean air and clean water, and so forth. So it's really about, again, raising our collective consciousness and working with and for the community, saying, this is how we enact single-payer Medicare for all. These are legislators we got to go after. This is how we get them out of office. This is how we put pressure on them. Like what Bernie was talking about, how you said, if I would become president, I would campaign in West Virginia and put a lot of pressure on Joe Manchin to actually be the advocate we need him to be. We got to do that everywhere. We got to build that movement, because us as elected officials or as candidates, we are nothing without the movement. Literally nothing.
Well, you need to watch my telethon for Shama Sawan. It was a 2-hour telethon that I did with some other YouTube hosts, and she literally did that. That's why Seattle was the first city in the country to get a $15 minimum wage. We structured the whole show around her accomplishments, and we interviewed movement leaders who she worked hand in glove with, okay? She even has a person in her office whose title is community organizer. So this is what you're talking about, and this is what Bernie said he would be. He would be the organizer in chief. But, I know that you're running a movement campaign, Derek, and that's how you're getting making traction in this Republican community. You've already alluded to how you've convinced Trump voters to support you. Talk more about your movement campaign and how that would translate to a movement, if you get elected, how you would keep that going.
Part of my political analysis, I look back to the 60s and I look at Barry Goldwater, right? And Barry Goldwater, for those that are not familiar, was a Republican challenger. He was conservative, by back then standards. And he lost, but then he created this movement of Barry Goldwater Republicans. And their MO, right? Their philosophy was, we are going to take over city councils, we're going to take over water boards, we're going to organize, we're going to teach all of our people about civic engagement, and what we're going to do is we're going to organize the republic and we're going to come to power. And I think if you take a look at where we are today, it is as a direct result of that 10 years of political organizing that was done around Barry Goldwater and his Republicans. Fast forward to 10 years ago or the past couple of election cycles, I really look at Bernie as being like our kind of contemporary generation's equivalent of Barry Goldwater. He had a lot of support. He had all the organizers on the political left. And so what we're starting to see is folks take over school boards and water boards. I was speaking to one of AOC's staffers recently, and we were talking about the number of folks that are planning on running this year and next year, and it's numbering in the thousands of folks, progressives, young people, are running for positions at every single level of government. They're going out there, they're doing the work of the movement, which I think is a different way of saying going and meeting people where they're at. Canvassing, knocking doors, targeting people, micro-targeting, going out, having the conversations and explaining to people what their power is. A couple of months ago, we were out at the San Bernardino County Fair, and we were registering new voters, young folks. Right now, young people under the age of 20 are breaking for the left and for progressive and Democratic type parties, 2/3 to 1/3. We have never before, in at least the statistical recorded history within the Republic, ever seen the numbers breaking that. Even in the 60s, it was still 50-50 in terms of young folks. Right now, today, it's breaking 2/3 to 1/3. So I think if we take a look at, at young people, and you take a look, the writing is in, sort of the writing is on the wall as to like where we're going. And I think that what we need to do is really heads down and focus on organizing people by registering them to vote. In my district right now, we keep on referring to it as a Republican district. Well, what does that mean? It means that the district voted Republican. But let's drill down into the numbers, right? The Republican, freshman Trump-backed Republican, won by 30,000 votes. There are 10,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in this district. And by the way, this district is super iconic. It includes the eastern parts of Yosemite, Sequoia, Joshua Tree, Death Valley, all the way up to Mammoth. It's one of the largest districts in the United States, the largest in California.
You mean geographically?
Geographically, yeah, it's huge. It also has the Owens River Valley, which provides LA and Southern California with 40% of its water. It has no business being in the hands of a freshman Trump-backed Republican. Again, we start digging in and looking at the numbers. Why is it Republican? There's 130,000 unregistered folks, namely here in the high desert, the vast majority of whom are inferred progressives and Democratic voters. We know what the work is, right? Yeah. And this district isn't the only one. There are other folks where Republicans have won in D+5 districts, right, in terms of registered voters. And so when I talk about a movement campaign, it's a campaign that understands the work that needs to be done in terms of registering voters and running aggressive GOTV efforts. But there's a third very, very important piece. And the important piece is that what really activates the base of voters, right, when we're talking about voter apathy and stuff like that, the biggest kind of silver bullet and the thing that deflates voter apathy is when you give people what they want, right? And you find that out by going and asking them. And so when you start talking about Medicare for all and tuition-free college education, well, surprise, everyone shows up at the polls. And why is that? Because you're giving people what they're asking for.
But with all this organizing and all this listening, we still have the influence of big money. And we can see, I was radicalized during the Occupy movement. To me, the Bernie Sanders campaign was the extension. Like if Occupy believed in electoral politics, which it didn't, Bernie would be their candidate. And we saw him get sabotaged twice by not just big money, because he raised quite a lot of money, most of it from small donations, as he famously said, $27. And yet they still came in, the establishment, and this time it was Barack Obama. That wasn't so much of a case of big money, but it certainly was who Obama answers to. So you guys you obviously have the best platform. You have the passion, the energy, the intelligence. You speak really well about all these issues, and yet the money is going to be coming in from all the usual influences. In your case, Derek, who knows, maybe that same money that funds Trump will come in against you. And Shervin, in your case, it's going to be those same corporate interests that has kept Brad Sherman in office. What is your plan to overcome this money and break out? And to close, how can people watching help you do it?
That's a great question. Just one point I want to make about an earlier comment Derek made. Derek, when you and I are elected, we are working on the Owens Valley issue. It's over 100 years that the city of LA has stolen the water of the indigenous Paiute tribes in the Owens Valley, and that is baked in federal law. We're going to work together to fix that. But coming to the final question, Lauren, we are also a movement campaign here in CA 30. We are building a new political coalition of young people, people of color, immigrants that are sick and tired of the status quo and want to see a real progressive champion fighting with and for the community on Capitol Hill. Again, we are a D+18 district that Bernie Sanders won handily during the presidential primary. there is no reason why there's no political downside for the incumbent to be a bold progressive champion. But we all know that Brad Sherman, of 24 years, has not been that person. I am proud to say that our campaign has outraised all prior primary challengers combined. We have over 150 volunteers signed up currently, still 10 months away from the primary, over 2/3 of whom live here in our district, and roughly 70% of whom are under the age of 30. So it's a very young campaign. I'm proud to say that we have 13 and 14-year-olds who are volunteers for us and are putting together driveway discussions. And we just had one over the weekend in Sherman Oaks, where it was like a group of 15 people got together and we spoke about the issues that are at the forefront of their minds, what they want to see in the legislator, what they want to see, all those kitchen table issues they want addressed. And that's going to be the key to win, is holding these driveway discussions, to use Derek's terms and the harm reduction model of meeting people where they're at and talking about what matters. And that's how we're going to win. It's really turning out the vote in these progressive circles within our district, tapping into those precincts that had high turnout for Bernie, registering folks to vote. I'm proud to have the endorsement of 90 for 90, which is an organization that wants to register 90 new folks per precinct every single election cycle, and working together to register folks, get out the vote. And at the same time, what's amazing is that there are a lot of progressives that are running for city council and state assembly here in Los Angeles as well. One person named Albert Corrado, who we've endorsed, the mutual endorsement, running for city council against Mitch O'Farrell. There's another young lady, Yasmin Pomeroy, running here in our district. And we're all working together because we're all running on the same platforms. We all want to see single payer Medicare for all. We want to see Green New Deal, housing as a human right, decriminalized immigration, all that good stuff. And so really kind of combining our efforts and energizing the entire community to say, this is our moment to take the city of LA back in the hands of the people and get real bona fide progressive champions fighting for us. And so it's just a really exciting time to be in this process. I'm humbled each and every single day by the outpouring of support we've received from our community. We've already contacted close to 12,000 community members now, and I can count on one hand how many folks have said they like Brad Sherman. So it's an incredible moment, and we are very well positioned to retire him in 2022.
I'm wondering if you've talked about in California, maybe getting people that share this platform who are running for federal office, because you were just speaking about local offices, and everybody, it makes sense. It's very efficient. If people are in the neighborhood, they can speak for their city council candidate and for their congressman. You know, it's really good to share those volunteers. And would you guys consider like looking at the landscape in California and running as a slate, maybe just together and sharing some things? And also, I was going to ask you about seeking the endorsements, where you stand with organizations like Brand New Congress, Justice Democrats, Our Revolution, and Progressive Democrats of America, Indivisible, you know, some of these other organizations that are politically active.
Happy to jump in first if that's okay. Yeah, we are proud to have the endorsement of Brand New Congress nationally. And, you know, we are working with progressive leaders, with PDA, with Our Revolution and others to hopefully secure their endorsement as well. I've been in a lot of meetings with the San Fernando Valley chapter of PDA and the newly reestablished LA chapter of PDA as well that voted to endorse us during their inaugural meeting. So I am all for
the Burn chapter of.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Feel But the Burn SFE Democratic Club has also given us their seal of approval. We also have the endorsement, like I said, of West Valley People's Alliance, Marianne Williamson nationally as well. Both Derek and I have her endorsement, and there's a slate of us on her group as well. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some great candidates that are either running a second campaign or they're first-time candidates like Derek and I. I know Angelica Duenas is running right next door in California 29. Her and I are very close. Maybe a girl going against Adam Schiff in CA 28. So it's, you know, it's a great moment, you know, where we see a lot of great progressives running. And I'm all for kind of combining our efforts, because I think it really energizes the community around, all right, this is our moment to, again, retake our political system, put it back in the hands of the people.
And Derek, how are you going to beat the Trump money if it comes in?
Yeah, so I think running a slate, and obviously, always, open to conversations, at the state level. But speaking specifically within the district, I think one thing that our campaign has done really well is that we have started to identify partnerships, and we started to do this very, very early. Because if we're going to be able to flip this district, then what it's going to require is it's going to require a coalition of folks that are all rowing in the same direction. If you take a look at what happened in the district a couple of cycles ago, there were two Republicans that advanced to the final round, to the general election, because there was infighting. And so I think what's really, really important, and again, what we've done really well, is we started to figure out, okay, who's going to run for which position, so that we can start to link arms early, so that we can, in the legal allowed way, that we can have a coalition, a slate, so that we were going to be able to do the work necessary. I was peripherally involved in helping to staff some of the teams and some of the folks that went into Georgia that registered the 70,000 voters in 4 weeks. The way that was done, and the way that organizing happens, and these really, really big organizational voter registration drives happen, is done in a very messy way, because coordination is oftentimes not allowed. There's very strict rules. And so what you end up having is you have lots and lots of organizations showing up into a space and then doing the work. And there's a lot of duplication of work and stuff like that due to the rules. But that's exactly what it's going to take. And I think that you can do that by getting the endorsements of big national organizations. You can also do that by building a slate and really working and developing partnerships within your communities.
Okay, well, we're going to close right now. I'm going to promote my show for next week, but first I want to ask you if you could share your website and your Twitter handle and where people can go to donate and volunteer.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so my website, the easiest way to get to it is my initials, so DM4ca.com. And the ask that I have is that everyone donate $1 to the campaign, $1 or $2. It really, really makes a difference. If just looking at Nina's finance numbers, looking at Odessa's numbers, looking at anyone's numbers, I mean, the trick is really to plug into the small dollar donations. We are not accepting any corporate donations. And so what that means is that we really need and rely upon small dollar donations. So again, it's DM4ca.com. And I just would really ask if you like the message and you want to support folks, I'd ask if there's any possible way to really throw a couple bucks to Shervin and I. That would be really, really helpful.
Thanks, Derek. And yeah, our website is my first name, Shervin, Shervin 4, thevalley.com. Please sign up to volunteer. Please donate to our People First campaign. We are, again, igniting a movement here in our CA 30 district to oust a corporate Democrat and elect a real progressive to fight for us on Capitol Hill. Please donate any amount you can. We are asking folks for $20.22 for our 2022 campaign, but really any amount helps. And our campaign also proudly accepts zero corporate PAC money. We don't take any lobbyist money. I've taken no fossil fuel money pledge, no COP money pledge, the Code Pink pledge to divest from the U.S. war machine, and much, much more. We are 100% reliant on our progressive donors. And so please, whatever amount you can throw to Derek's campaign, to my campaign, it helps sustain us and reach as many voters as we can to flip our districts and really start fighting for working people. Shervin4thevalley.com.
Like I said before, you're so passionate, you're so smart, you're so committed, and I think you really know how to get it done. So I am going to support you. I encourage all my viewers to support you. Share this show, people. On Sunday, I'm going to be interviewing David Talbot. As I told you, he's a journalist. He founded Salon Magazine. His new book is called By the Light of Burning Dreams: The Triumphs and Tragedies of the Second American Revolution. And he talks about, there's a chapter on Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda. There's a chapter on Bobby Seale and the Black Panthers, chapter on Heather Booth and the Jane Collective. I'm in the chapter now about Cesar Chavez, and they had that strike. Anyway, I'm going to be doing that show Sunday, a little bit earlier at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So tune into that, support these guys, share the show, and keep fighting.